The window glows. Chapter 1. The still morning. The mornings were Harold's favorite part of the day. He woke before the sun, not because he had to, but because it felt right. The silence of dawn was a friend of his, steady and patient. He'd pad across the cool kitchen floor in his slippers, switch on the kettle, and open the window above the sink. The air would come in, fresh, damp, and filled with the scent of cut grass and the faint hum of far-off birds. The town of Brookfield was just waking. Somewhere a screen door creaked, a dog barked, a car started up. Harold stood there, mug in hand, watching the light climb over the roofs like a slow tide. He lived alone now. Marjorie had been gone 5 years come May. They'd shared 41 years together, and sometimes it felt like yesterday, other times like another lifetime. "Good morning, Marge," he said softly, the way he always did. It was habit now, talking to her photograph on the counter, next to the radio and the bowl of lemons she always liked full. The kitchen looked much the same as when she was alive. Lace curtains, faded wallpaper with little blue tulips, the clock that ticked too loudly. He hadn't changed much. He didn't need to. After breakfast, he usually walked to the post office or sat on the porch with his crossword. He waved to whoever passed, mostly young parents pushing strollers or folks headed to work. The world, he thought, was busier than it used to be, but not necessarily happier. That morning, he noticed a moving truck across the street. A young couple, mid-30s maybe, with 2 boys chasing each other around the yard. He smiled. The house had been empty for nearly a year. It was good to see life return. He made a note to bake something later. A pie, maybe. Marjorie used to say no one could resist a neighbor with pie. After lunch, he decided to tackle the attic. It had been on his list since spring. Dusty boxes, old coats, keepsakes from a long career at Lincoln High. He climbed the narrow stairs slowly, each step creaking like it was remembering him. The attic smelled of cedar and thyme. Sunlight streamed through a small round window, catching on the floating dust like tiny stars. He sorted through lesson plans, faded report cards, and a box labeled school days. Inside were photographs, yearbooks, and a folder of letters. One envelope caught his eye, yellowed, edges curling. The handwriting was neat, slanted slightly right. Claire Martin, 1971. The name sent a small ripple through his chest. He sat on the old trunk and opened it carefully. Inside was a short note. "Dear Harold, thank you for being such a kind friend this year. I've learned more from watching you teach than I ever did in college. I'll be leaving after this term. Michael's been offered a residency in Chicago. It's exciting, but I'll miss this place more than I expected. I'll miss our talks most of all. Yours truly, Claire." That was it. No secret confession, no mystery, just gratitude. But somehow, it was enough to make his throat tighten. He remembered that spring like it was yesterday. The way she'd laughed at his dry jokes, the way she'd tap her pencil when she was thinking, the way the hallways seemed brighter when she walked by. He'd never told her how he felt. She was too young, too full of future. And he'd been cautious, too proper, maybe. He folded the letter carefully and set it on the table beside him. "Funny thing," he murmured, "how some words can wait 50 years to be heard." Downstairs, the kettle whistled faintly through the floorboards. Harold stood, brushing the dust from his knees, and took one last look around the attic. So many pieces of a life up here. Lesson books, photographs, a dented globe. He smiled softly. That evening, after supper, he sat by the front window with the letter beside his tea. The sunset poured through the lace curtains, scattering light across the kitchen floor in the same pattern it had for decades. It looked like gold spilled over everything he'd ever loved. He thought of Marjorie. He thought of Claire. And for the first time in a long while, he felt both sorrow and gratitude resting side by side, neither demanding the last word. The kettle began to cool. The window glowed. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd bake that pie. Maybe take it over to welcome the new family. Because life, he thought, was still happening, right here, right now. And that was reason enough to keep the kettle warm. Chapter 2: Days of Chalk and Dust. The past had a scent to it: chalk dust, floor wax, and the faint aroma of coffee from the teacher's lounge. Even now, if Harold closed his eyes, he could hear the steady buzz of the fluorescent lights and the echo of sneakers squeaking down the hallway. Lincoln High School, 1969. He had just turned 36, still trim then, with a full head of dark hair and the calm authority that came from years of teaching. History was his subject, and he loved it, not because of the dates or the battles, but because of the people behind them. Every time we talk about history, he used to tell his students, "We're talking about ourselves. We just happen to be wearing different clothes." That spring, the principal had introduced a new English teacher to the staff, Miss Claire Martin. He remembered that moment so clearly, the way she stood in the doorway of the lounge, holding her books close to her chest, smiling a little nervously. Her hair brushed her shoulders, and she wore one of those long floral skirts that seemed to float when she moved. There was something about her that drew the room's attention without her even trying. She laughed when she spoke, a soft, quick laugh that sounded like sunlight would if it could. "Everyone," said the principal, "this is Miss Martin, fresh from the University of Michigan. She'll be teaching sophomore English." "Welcome to Lincoln High," Harold said, offering his hand. She shook it. "Thank you, Mr. Benson." Harold Benson. History. Her handshake was firm, confident, but her eyes were kind. He didn't know it then, but that simple introduction would echo through the rest of his life. The weeks went by, and Claire settled in quickly. She decorated her classroom with quotes from poets and painters, and the students adored her. She had a way of making literature come alive. Harold would pass by her room sometimes between classes, listening to the rise and fall of her voice as she read aloud. Even when she read a line of Shakespeare, she made it sound as plain and beautiful as a morning prayer. At lunch, they often found themselves in the same corner of the lounge. They'd talk about lesson plans, books, or sometimes nothing at all. She liked to tease him about his careful ways. "Mr. Benson, you always pack the same lunch," she said once, smiling as he unwrapped his sandwich. "Ham and cheese, apple, coffee in the same thermos. Don't you ever change it up?" He chuckled. Predictability is underrated. Besides, the cafeteria meatloaf could end a man's career. She laughed, covering her mouth. "You might be right about that." They became friends, simple as that. No scandal, no secrets. Just two teachers who found comfort in each other's company. But there were moments, small, almost invisible, when something warmer flickered between them. One afternoon, she stayed late grading essays in his room because the heater in hers had broken. The school was quiet. The light outside was turning gold. He looked up from his desk and found her watching him with that thoughtful half-smile she wore when she was about to ask something important. "Do you ever get tired of it, Harold? The same lessons, year after year?" He leaned back. "No, because the kids change. The world changes. Every class makes me rethink what I thought I knew." She nodded, tapping her pen against the table. "That's a good way to look at it. I'm not sure I have that patience yet." "You will," he said gently. "You've got the heart for it." She smiled at that softly. "That's kind of you to say." The air between them seemed to hold still. Then the clock struck 4, and just like that, the moment passed. When autumn came, rumors started that she was seeing someone, a medical student named Michael who visited from Chicago on weekends. Harold never asked about it, though he heard her mention him once or twice in passing. He'd nod politely, smile when she smiled, and pretend the ache inside him was just another late-season cold. She once asked him, "Were you ever married?" "Not yet," he said, half joking. "Not yet?" she repeated, raising an eyebrow. "I'm open to the idea," he said. "I just haven't found anyone patient enough to put up with me." She laughed. "Oh, you're not so bad. You just need someone who appreciates your orderliness." I believe that's the kindest way anyone's ever called me dull. "Not dull," she said quickly, her eyes softening. "Steady. There's a difference." He smiled, but that night, when he got home to his quiet apartment, He found himself replaying her words over and over. By winter, her engagement was official. She came into the lounge one Monday morning, cheeks pink from the cold, holding out her hand to show a ring that sparkled like sunlight on fresh snow. "Michael proposed last night," she said, her face glowing. The room burst into congratulations. Harold joined in, clapping, smiling, even giving her a small hug. She smelled faintly of lilac and chalk. "That's wonderful news, Claire," he said. "He's a lucky man." "Thank you, Harold," she said softly. "That means a lot." That afternoon, he taught his class about the American Revolution, but he couldn't seem to keep his focus. The words on the blackboard blurred, and when the bell rang, he stayed behind, staring at the empty desks. Later, he sat alone in the teacher's parking lot, the sky deepening into a sharp winter blue. He felt foolish, almost angry at himself. What had he expected? That she'd suddenly see him as anything more than a mentor? A colleague? He was nearly 40. She had her whole life ahead of her. When he finally started the car, the windshield had frosted over. He wiped it clear with his sleeve and drove home in silence. The wedding was in April, held at a small riverside church. Claire had invited him, and he couldn't bring himself to refuse. The day was bright and mild. Trees in full bloom, petals drifting through the air like snowflakes. She looked radiant, her white dress catching the sunlight. He sat near the back, watching as she said her vows. When the couple walked down the aisle together, hand in hand, everyone cheered. Harold clapped too, smiling until his cheeks hurt. Later, at the reception, she found him by the punch bowl. "Thank you for coming," she said. "It means more than you know." "Wouldn't have missed it," he replied, forcing a lightness into his voice. "You look happy." "Truly." "I am," she said. "Nervous, but happy." He nodded. "That's the best kind." They talked a few minutes longer. Then she was swept away by guests and family. He watched her go, her laughter blending with the music. That night, when he got home, he took off his tie, poured himself a glass of water, and sat in the dark. He felt hollow but strangely calm. Somewhere deep inside, he understood that this moment, this quiet ache, would become part of who he was. Not a wound, exactly. More like a scar that time would polish smooth. Years passed. He met Marjorie at a church picnic. She was kind, practical, and steady, the kind of woman who could turn a drafty house into a home. They married in 1973, and life moved forward. He saw Claire once more, maybe 10 years later, at a district teachers' conference. She was there with Michael, who had become a successful doctor. She seemed happy, older, certainly, but with the same warmth in her voice. They exchanged pleasantries, laughed about old times, and that was that. When they parted, she touched his arm gently and said, "Take care of yourself, Harold." He had, in his own way. Now, sitting in his kitchen decades later, the letter open on the table, Harold thought of all those moments. The laughter, the quiet pauses, the words left unsaid. It struck him that unspoken love has its own kind of dignity. It doesn't demand or expect. It just is, like a river flowing quietly beneath the surface of a life, unseen but always there. He leaned back in his chair, listening to the house settle around him. Outside, the evening was soft and blue. The sound of children's voices drifted from across the street, the new family playing in the yard. He smiled faintly. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd introduce himself properly. Maybe offer to help them plant something. Daffodils, perhaps. Marjorie had always said you can tell a lot about a person by how they treat their garden. He folded Claire's letter and slipped it into the drawer beside the stove. Not hidden away, but not forgotten either. Just where it belonged. Part of his story, resting quietly in the home he'd built since. And as the last light faded through the lace curtains, Harold whispered to the empty room, "Thank you, Claire." The kettle whistled, as if answering him. Chapter 3: The Letter in the Attic. The next morning, Harold woke to the sound of children laughing outside his window. For a moment, he thought it was long ago, that it was Saturday, and his son Mark was tossing a ball with his sister on the lawn. But when he blinked and looked out, it was the neighbor boys, the new family across the street. They were trying to hit a baseball off a tee, their shouts bright in the cool air. The older one swung too hard and missed. The younger one clapped anyway. Harold smiled. "Good form," he said quietly, sipping his tea. "Needs work on the follow-through, though." The house felt lighter that morning. Maybe it was the spring sun sneaking through the lace curtains, or maybe it was something inside him, some small warmth stirred by the letter he'd found the day before. He hadn't slept much that night. He'd lain awake, replaying the sound of her voice in his memory, the years unspooling like an old film reel, chalk, laughter, the hum of classroom lights. But instead of sadness, there was a strange calm. It was as if finding the letter hadn't opened an old wound, but rather reminded him that he had lived, fully, deeply, even with what was left unsaid. After breakfast, he wrapped up a pie he'd baked, a cherry one, slightly uneven on top, and carried it across the street. The young woman answered the door. She was about 30, brown hair pulled into a ponytail, with the tired but kind expression of someone who balanced work and motherhood without enough hours in the day. "Hi there," Harold said, holding out the pie awkwardly. "Welcome to Maple Street. Thought I'd bring over a little something. I'm Harold Benson, across the way." Her face lit up. "Oh, that's so kind of you. I'm Emily. And these two are Charlie and Ben." The boys peeked around her legs, eyeing him curiously. "Pie?" Ben asked. "Cherry," Harold said. "Made it myself." "Cool," said Charlie, grabbing his brother's hand. "Can we have some now, Mom?" Emily laughed. "After dinner, you two. Say thank you to Mr. Benson." "Thank you, Mr. Benson," they chorused, voices overlapping. Harold tipped his cap. "You're welcome. And if you ever need help with anything, tools, lawn stuff, history homework, just holler." "History homework?" she asked, smiling. "Retired teacher," he said. "Lincoln High, 35 years." Her eyebrows lifted. "I'm a teacher too, 3rd grade over at Brookfield Elementary." "Ah," he said, pleasantly surprised. "A colleague, then. Good to meet one of the new recruits." She grinned. "I've been there 6 years already, but I'll take new. It still feels like it most days." That first meeting led to more. Sometimes she'd wave from her porch as he raked leaves, or they'd chat on the sidewalk when she got home from school. She reminded him of Claire, not in looks, but in the way she cared about her students, in how she spoke about them as if they were her own. One Saturday, she came over with a plate of cookies. "My thank you for the pie," she said. "I might have burned the first batch." He laughed. "Burnt cookies build character. I used to tell my students that." They sat on the porch, watching the street, sipping lemonade. She told him about her husband, an engineer often traveling for work, and how she sometimes felt like she was raising the boys on her own. Harold listened, nodding, not interrupting, just the way he used to with his students when they needed to talk something out. At one point she said, "You must miss teaching." He paused. "Sometimes. Mostly the kids. They gave me a reason to get up early that didn't involve doctor's appointments." Emily laughed, but her eyes were soft. "You know," she said, "you should come talk to my class sometime. Tell them what history was like before iPads." He raised an eyebrow. "They'd think I'm from the Stone Age." "They'll love you," she said. "You've got that teacher energy still. You can't hide it." "Teacher energy," he repeated, amused. "Haven't heard that one before." "It's a thing," she said. "You walk into a room and kids know they should sit up a little straighter. My 3rd graders could use some of that." He chuckled. "Maybe I will then." That evening, when he came back inside, Harold took out Claire's letter again. He set it on the kitchen table, smoothing the folds gently. For the first time, he didn't feel the sharp tug of what was lost, just a quiet gratitude that something of her remained, guiding him still. He found himself thinking, maybe this was what memory was for, not to pull you backward, but to nudge you forward toward the living. He slipped the letter into a new envelope and placed it in a drawer with his teaching mementos. Then, For reasons he couldn't explain, he went to the phone and called the library. Brookfield Public, said a cheerful voice. Yes, hello, he said, clearing his throat. I was wondering if you still do those local history talks on Tuesday evenings. Sure do. Next one's about the old railroad line. You interested in attending? Attending, he said slowly. Or maybe helping. There was a pause. Helping. I used to teach at Lincoln High, he explained. Thought maybe I could offer a few stories. Keep the old days alive for the young folks. That would be wonderful, Mr. Benson, he said. I'll put you down. Glad to have you aboard. Tuesday came, and Harold put on a clean shirt, polished his shoes, and carried a few photos from his attic. A class picture, a map of Brookfield from the 1950s, and an old brass school bell. The library's community room smelled of books and carpet cleaner. A dozen people sat in folding chairs, mostly retirees and a few high schoolers earning extra credit. When it was his turn, Harold stood, cleared his throat, and said, My name's Harold Benson. I used to teach history right here in town. Tonight, I thought I'd tell you a little about how things looked before most of you had smartphones or hairlines like mine. The room chuckled. The tension lifted. He spoke for half an hour about the factory that once stood by the river, about the marching bands that paraded every 4th of July, about how, in 1971, the town nearly lost its school to a budget cut until the teachers marched in protest. When he finished, they clapped. It wasn't loud, but it was genuine. A woman his age said, I remember that march. You were one of the speakers. Harold smiled. Guilty as charged. Afterward, a boy approached him. Mr. Benson, were you really teaching when the moon landing happened? I was, he said. I let the kids listen to it on the radio during class. The principal nearly had my hide. The boy grinned. That's awesome. Walking home that night, the air crisp and cool, Harold felt something stirring again, a sense of usefulness. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed feeling needed. A few days later, Emily stopped him by the fence. I heard you gave a talk at the library, she said. My neighbor was there, said you were great. He shrugged modestly. They were kind enough to stay awake. Would you come talk to my class? She asked again, more serious now. Just a short visit. The kids are learning about local history. You'd be perfect. He hesitated. 3rd graders, you said? Don't worry. They're small but manageable. He smiled. All right. If you're sure they can handle a retired relic. Mr. Benson, she said with mock sternness, you're exactly the kind of relic they need. He laughed, shaking his head. I'll think about it. But that night, he already knew he would. Later, as he sat by the window, the room dimming around him, Harold looked at the glow spilling through the lace curtains, soft and golden, just like it had been for decades. It struck him that the glow hadn't changed, only he had. Once, it had lit the path toward what he longed for. Now it simply showed him what he had. The world outside his window was still alive. Children's laughter, the hum of cars, the smell of spring. He lifted his teacup in a small, private toast to the letter, to Claire, to Marjorie, to the long road of living. Still learning, he whispered. Still learning, after all. And as the window glowed into night, he felt, for the first time in a long while, that his story wasn't over yet. Chapter 4, Lessons Return. The day Harold agreed to visit Emily's classroom, he told himself it was just a one-time thing. He'd stand at the back, nod politely, maybe tell the kids a quick story about the old days of chalkboards and erasers, and that would be that. But when he stepped into Maple Street Elementary that Tuesday morning, something stirred inside him, a kind of soft, startled recognition. The scent of pencil shavings, the squeak of sneakers on tile, the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. It was like hearing an old song he hadn't realized he'd missed. Emily met him at the door, her hair pulled into a neat ponytail, a coffee mug in her hand that said "Best Teacher Ever" in purple letters. You actually came, she said with a grin. You're a brave man, Mr. Benson. 23 3rd graders on a rainy morning. Brave or foolish, Harold said, smiling. I'll let you decide which by the end of the day. The classroom walls were plastered with construction paper projects, maps, poems, and colorful leaves labeled our autumn words. In one corner sat a reading rug shaped like a giant tree trunk. A goldfish swam lazy circles in a bowl by the window. When Emily clapped her hands and called for attention, the room settled surprisingly fast. "Everyone," she said, "this is Mr. Benson. He's a retired history teacher from Lincoln High. He's here to share a few stories about what school was like when he started teaching, way back when dinosaurs roamed the earth." The children giggled. Harold laughed too. "Close," he said. "We had chalk instead of smart boards, and our biggest classroom technology was a globe that squeaked when you spun it." They were hooked already, eyes wide, faces turned toward him. He told them about his first year teaching, the time the principal's dog wandered into the classroom during a test, the epic snowstorm of '78 that shut down the whole district for a week. He told them how he once had to drive a student home after her bike chain snapped and she started crying in the parking lot. Each story brought laughter, questions, even a few gasps. "What did kids do back then, without tablets?" one boy asked. "Well," Harold said, "we talked to each other. Sometimes we even went outside and threw a ball instead of staring at one." That got another round of laughter. When the bell rang for lunch, a few children stayed behind to keep talking. One girl showed him her notebook full of sketches. Another said she wanted to be a teacher someday. Harold felt something loosen in his chest, something light and steady. On his walk home later, the rain had stopped and the air smelled of wet leaves. He realized he hadn't thought about being lonely all morning. The next week, Emily asked if he'd come back again, just for a short talk about local history. He did, then again, and soon enough, it became part of his weekly routine. Tuesday mornings were no longer quiet hours by the window. They were full of chatter and crayons, questions and energy. He started bringing small objects from his attic, a rotary phone, an old typewriter, his grandfather's pocket watch, to show the students how things once were. The kids called it Time Travel Tuesday, and Harold had to admit he liked the name. After one class, Emily said, "You know, you have a real way with them. You should have been an elementary teacher." He chuckled. "Ah, no, I like the older ones. Teenagers, full of questions and too much pride for their own good." Emily smiled. "Then you'd like these, too. Give them 10 years, they'll be just like that." One afternoon, as they packed up for the day, Emily handed him a stack of thank you cards the kids had made. Each one was a burst of color and crooked handwriting. "Thank you for teaching us about the olden days. You're funny and smart like my grandpa. Please come back again." Harold's throat tightened as he read them at home later. The living room felt warmer somehow, brighter. Even the tick of the clock sounded less lonely. He placed the cards on the mantel beside the photograph of Marjorie. "Look at that, Marge," he said softly. "Still useful after all." That night, while washing the dishes, he caught himself humming, an old tune from when he used to grade papers by lamplight. It had been years since he'd hummed without meaning to. After supper, he sat down at the kitchen table and opened his old leather planner, the one he hadn't touched since retirement. On the calendar page for October, he wrote in careful pen strokes, "Tuesday, Maple Street, 9 a.m. It felt right to write it down. A few days later, he received an envelope from Lincoln High, an invitation to the school's centennial reunion. He hadn't been back there in 20 years. He ran his thumb over the embossed lettering and smiled. Emily noticed it when she stopped by to return a book. "You going?" she asked. "I don't know yet. Maybe," he said. "Lot of old ghosts there." She tilted her head. "Good ghosts, I hope." He thought for a long moment. "Mostly," he said. "Some I wouldn't mind seeing again." "Then go," she said simply. "You've been helping these kids remember where they came from. Maybe it's time you did the same." The week before the reunion, Harold took his old corduroy jacket to the cleaners. It still fit, mostly. He even bought a new tie, the first in years. On the morning of the event, he stood before the mirror, smoothing his hair. A trace of nervousness fluttered in his chest, the same kind he used to feel before the first day of school. He glanced at the mantel again. The thank you cards, the photo of Marjorie, the letter from Claire folded neatly in its envelope. Life had come full circle in quiet ways, he thought. The past and the present weren't enemies anymore. They were companions, holding hands like two old friends. He took one last look around the room, switched off the lamp, and stepped outside. The day was bright and clear, with just enough wind to carry the scent of autumn through the air. The trees along Maple Street blazed in gold and red, their leaves rustling like applause. Harold Benson, retired teacher, once again had somewhere to be. And as he walked toward his car, he found himself smiling, steady, sure, and deeply alive. Chapter 5: The Glow of Evening. The Lincoln High reunion was held in the newly renovated gymnasium. Though to Harold's eye, not much had truly changed. The smell of floor polish and popcorn lingered in the air. The same banners hung proudly from the rafters, and the old mascot, the Lincoln Lions, still roared from the center of the basketball court. He stood at the doorway for a moment, letting the sound wash over him. Laughter, music from the 70s, the steady murmur of conversation. Everywhere he looked were faces he half remembered, older, softer around the edges, but still carrying that unmistakable spark of recognition. Harold Benson, is that you? He turned to see Bill Patterson, once the football coach, now walking with a cane and the same booming voice. They clasped hands, traded jokes, and swapped quick stories. Then came a parade of others, former students, fellow teachers, townsfolk who remembered his classes fondly. Still grading papers in your sleep? One teased. Only the bad essays, Harold replied, grinning. But even as he laughed, part of his mind kept scanning the room, looking, almost unconsciously, for a familiar face he hadn't seen in half a century. And then he saw her. Claire Martin, though her name tag read Claire Morrison now, stood near the refreshment table, holding a cup of coffee. Her hair, once auburn, was now silver gray, but her posture, her warm eyes, even the gentle way she smiled at someone's joke, it was all unmistakably her. For a moment, Harold simply watched her. The crowd seemed to fade, the music softened, and he was 28 again, standing beside her in the teacher's lounge, laughing about a mischievous student or a broken projector. He walked over slowly. Claire. She turned, eyes widening, and then she smiled, that same kind, surprised smile he remembered. Harold Benson. My goodness, I didn't know if you'd come. I almost didn't, he said, but I'm glad I did. They found a quiet corner of the gym, away from the music, and talked. About their years at Lincoln High, about the people who'd come and gone, about how time had both stretched and collapsed between them. Do you remember the day we painted the backdrop for the spring play? She asked, laughing. You ended up with blue paint on your shoes for weeks. And you told everyone it was a new fashion statement, he said. You always did have more imagination than I did. Her smile softened. I heard about Marjorie, she said gently. I'm sorry, Harold. She was a lovely woman. He nodded. She was. I was lucky. For a moment, they both sat quietly, listening to the hum of the reunion around them, the echoes of laughter, the low strains of a saxophone playing a familiar old tune. I found your letter, he said finally. She tilted her head. My letter? From the year you left. I was cleaning the attic this spring. You said you'd miss our talks. A faint blush rose in her cheeks. I remember writing that. I was young and nervous about leaving. I didn't realize, back then, how much those talks meant to me, he said. I suppose I didn't say it enough. Her eyes met his, soft but steady. We never really know how much things mean until later, do we? No, he said quietly. But later's still something. They both smiled then, gentle, knowing, and free of regret. As the evening went on, Harold and Claire drifted among the guests, swapping stories, laughing at old memories. When it was time to say goodbye, she touched his arm lightly. I'm in town for a few weeks, she said. Maybe we could have coffee before I go. I'd like that, he replied. Very much. They exchanged numbers, something neither of them could have imagined doing 50 years ago, and promised to meet at the cafe near the library. When Harold returned home that night, the house was quiet again. The moonlight spilled through the lace curtains, soft and pale against the familiar kitchen table. He placed his jacket on the chair and sat for a while, replaying the night in his mind. The laughter, the music, Claire's voice blending with it all. The window glowed faintly with the golden light of the street lamp, the same light he'd watched for years. But tonight it felt different, warmer somehow, as if it held not just memory, but possibility. He took the letter from the mantel and unfolded it once more. The paper was fragile, the ink faded, but the words still lived. "I'll miss our talks most of all." He smiled, folded it again, and set it gently beside Marjorie's photograph. "Don't worry, Marge," he whispered. "I'm still talking." Then he turned off the lamp, letting the quiet fill the room. Outside, the trees rustled in the cool night air, and somewhere down the street, a child's laughter echoed faintly. Harold sat for a long time, feeling the stillness settle around him. Not empty this time, but whole. The years behind him felt less like loss and more like a story finally finding its rhythm. And the years ahead, however few or many, seemed open, waiting to be filled with small, good things, a cup of coffee, a new friend, a Tuesday morning in a classroom full of laughter. He rose, rinsed his cup, and paused one last time at the window. The light shimmered softly across the glass, golden and calm. The world outside was quiet, but alive. And in that quiet glow, Harold Benson smiled, ready for tomorrow. Afterward, the light that stays. When I first imagined Harold Benson, I didn't see a grand hero or a man of great adventure. I saw someone quiet, someone you might pass by at the grocery store or wave to from across the street without knowing the stories that live behind his eyes. He's a man like many others of his generation, decent, steady, carrying the weight of years that shaped him in ways he didn't always understand. And like so many of us, Harold spent a long time believing that the best chapters of his life had already been written. But life, if it teaches us anything, reminds us that meaning doesn't end when the world grows quieter. It deepens. For Harold, that meaning returned not through grand romance or dramatic change, but through the small acts that make a life whole again. Baking a pie for a new neighbor, telling stories to children, sharing coffee with an old friend. Each of these moments was a light, modest, ordinary, but enduring. The glow in his window became more than just evening light. It was the reflection of a heart learning, at last, that love isn't measured by what's returned. It's measured by what remains. If you've ever loved deeply, lost quietly, or wondered whether there's still time for something new, Harold's story is, in a small way, your story too. Because even as the years turn and the nights grow long, there's always a gentle glow waiting somewhere, in a kitchen window, in a memory, or in the steady hands of someone still choosing kindness. That light stays, always.